everybody, I'm Elizabeth Hines from ourpaleofamily.com, and today I am back with another Instant Pot recipe, and we're making Italian roast beef or Italian beef sandwiches. I almost said French dips, which is hilarious, but it is going to make a really flavorful broth like a French dip with that au jus that you would then dip your bread in. But I'm assuming you know, since it's our paleo family, that we are paleo, which means we're not eating bread. Occasionally, excuse me, occasionally we will have some gluten-free bread, but I think if you're going to eat this as a sandwich, you need like that good crusty Italian or French baguette that's going to hold up to the juicy meat. So I am going to choose to eat my Italian roast beef as a soup, and I'll show you that at the very end. But my family, I think, is going to want to eat it with some rice and some vegetables. But either way, it starts the same way in the Instant Pot, and then you can do with it at the end what you like. But when I cook and get all this delicious broth, I want to eat that broth, or drink that broth, I guess. Which is why I think so many of these Instant Pot recipes lend themselves to really being a soup or a stew, because then you get to really consume all that delicious nutritious broth. So what I have done is I have my Instant Pot on saute normal, I hope. Oh, it's on more. That's okay. I'll leave it on more. You could do it on normal or more. I'll keep an eye on it, so more is fine. And I have about 2 tablespoons of bacon fat, reserved drippings from some of my good quality healthy bacon from healthy animals. I have 1 medium-sized onion. So I'm going to just plop in there and give that a good stir. I just cut those in sort of half moons. So I have a really flavorful spice blend that I'm going to use on my meat, but I do just want to give a little bit of salt and pepper to my onions. The salt will help start pulling the moisture out of the onions, get them going. We'll let those go for just a minute while I take care of my meat. So I wanted to show you what I did to my meat already. And this is a 2 1/4 pound bottom round roast. So you can see it's pretty lean. There's a little bit of marbling in there, but not a lot. But there was this little fat cap on the bottom, and so I cut the bulk of that off. I didn't want to cut all of it off because I want some of that fat to render down into my dish. So I left some. I wasn't real particular to get it all off. There's my garlic clove. I'm going to set it on top of my pepper, so hopefully I won't lose it. And then I just cut it into these chunks, 2 by 4, medium-sized chunks. And I'm going to coat them in this spice blend. So I'll have the spice blend written up for you with the rest of the recipe on my website. And you could put your meat in a bowl and toss it around with your spices. I'm just sprinkling it on. I'll toss it around here on my paper towel. I always try to blot my meat a little bit to get some of the moisture off. I think it helps me get a better sear. My spices here have quite a few things. Of course, we have salt and pepper. We also have, so this is Italian roast beef, remember? So I have onion and garlic powder, basil, oregano, paprika, a little rosemary, a little thyme, actually a lot of spices. And my son actually walked by and said, "Ooh, that smells really good." So that's a good sign. And it does smell good, and I tasted it, and it tastes, of course I tasted it. It tastes great. It seems like a lot of spices, but we have over 2 pounds of meat, so we need a lot to cover to really flavor it. It's what's giving this its Italian name and not just regular roast beef or pot roast. So I'm just kind of rolling this around, soaking up all that I spilled. This would be an adequate amount of spices for, I would say, up to a 3 pound roast at max. If you had if you had anything bigger than 3 pounds, I would 1.5. The spice mixture, I wouldn't quite double it, but 1.5. Okay, so my onions are going. They're starting to get a little color on them. I'm just going to pull them out. Smells so good. I love the smell of onions cooking. It's a nice sweet onion. I'm going to get every single one this way. So I'm going to put my chunks in. You can totally skip this step of searing your meat. You don't have to do it. I think it adds an extra layer of flavor. If you're in a hurry, you can skip it. And you certainly don't have to go through the process of browning on each side if you don't want to. If you have the time, you want to, go for it. But you certainly don't have to, because those little chunks like that have 6 sides, so that can take a little bit of time. Now I'm going to add some additional vegetables to my dish, but not until the end, because I want to add mushrooms and bell peppers. And I really want my bell peppers pretty crispy still, and if I put them in the Instant Pot, they would get very soft. And so I'm just going to saute these on the side in the skillet. I have 1 clove of garlic here that I'm going to add. I did have garlic powder in my spice mixture, but just a little bit of fresh garlic adds a nice flavor, so I'm going to add that in. Let's give these a flip. Let me just show you this. It's nice and brown, good caramelization on that meat. I'm going to take the time to brown 2 sides, or sear 2 sides. I'm going to pull these out and add my broth. So what I have here is 2 cups of mostly beef broth. I cooked some chicken wings recently in the Instant Pot, and they just produced so much gelatin. I couldn't get rid of it because that's really, that's what's so good for your gut, very healing, good for your joints and everything. But it doesn't have very much flavor, because that's the process I go through when I make my chicken wings, like my hot wings or teriyaki wings, is I cook them in the Instant Pot for a few minutes. It renders out a lot of that fat, and then I brown them in the oven. So I get this great gelatinous broth from my wings, but I don't put any vegetables or anything in there like when I'm typically making chicken broth. So it doesn't have a lot of flavor. So you can see it looks kind of chunky. These are the blobs of gelatin from making my chicken wings. I put about a half a cup of that chicken broth gelatin in there, and then I filled it up the rest with beef broth. And that's just a packaged beef broth because I don't have any good bones, any good beef bones for making homemade broth right now. But I will. I found a source online. I plan to order some. So I have lots of that fond in the bottom of my skillet or pan, and I'm going to deglaze. Just pour that right in. And this pair of tongs has the rubber tips, so it's not quite as powerful for scraping all that fond off the bottom. But it will do a good enough job. I just have to work at it a teeny bit harder. I'm going to go ahead and turn this off, because I have to turn it off to then switch it to pressure mode. So let me just stir this around a teeny bit. Make sure I get most of that cleared off the bottom. I'm going to put my meat back in, just kind of turn each piece around in that broth. And I'm going to cook this for 30 minutes. And I'll tell you from past experience that 30 minutes is typically enough. But if you've watched the great pot roast video, then you'll see that some cuts of meat are just tough. And I don't know if it has to do with how that cow was raised or fed, or I don't know how it was processed. I have no idea. But it's so funny to read people's comments. People have all kinds of ideas about what makes a piece of meat tough versus tender. But regardless, that was a piece of meat that proves that sometimes the cooking method doesn't seem to make much difference. Anywho, for a typical bottom round roast, 30 minutes cut into chunks like this, will be just right to give us a nice, I want that sort of roast beef texture where I'm going to more shred it than slice it, but you could absolutely slice it. It's not going to be pink in the middle. It'll be cooked all the way through and hopefully fall apart tender. So my gasket is on tight. Put this lid on. Maybe I'll put the lid on. There we go. Make sure my valve is on. I'm set to sealing, and I just want manual and 30 minutes. Manual high pressure. And so this will come up to pressure pretty quickly because there's not a lot of volume in there. So it probably 10 to 12 minutes, and that'll be up to pressure based on my past experience. And then 30 minutes to cook, and then I'll let it depressurize for a few minutes, but then I'll quick release the rest of the pressure. And in the meantime, I will get my peppers all sliced up and my mushrooms, and I'll get ready to saute those, and we'll have those on the side. So I'll see you back here in just a few minutes. Hi everybody. So it took our Instant Pot just about 5 minutes to come up to pressure, and then we cooked the meat for 30 minutes. I let the pressure come down naturally for about 5 minutes, and then I released the rest of the pressure. And I'm opting to slice this, thinking about the idea of it being a roast beef sandwich. I'm going to slice it into, not super thin, because I don't want to take the time to be real fussy and make super thin slices. I'm going to give this a slice against the grain, and then get the meat back in the delicious broth with the onions. So I'm just going to slice each of my chunks. I sharpened my knife before I got started, which will make it easier. You could shred this if you prefer. Cut it into smaller pieces. We're going with the slicing today. I'm going to cut it this way. I can tell that is with the grain. I couldn't quite tell. It's sort of a weird piece because of the way that cut super easily. I could tell I was cutting with the grain. You could, if you wanted this to be more like a roast beef with gravy sort of deal, you could thicken your broth either with a slurry of, I would use arrowroot to keep with our paleo-ness, but you could use cassava flour as well. You could use cornstarch if you eat corn, which I wouldn't recommend, but can. I realize you're not all paleo. I did want to point out that this recipe, as I've written it and prepared it here for you, it is acceptable for the autoimmune paleo diet, with the exception of the paprika in my spice blend. And there is some controversy with AIP as to what is allowed and what's not allowed, but at the very sort of height or the beginning of your autoimmune paleo reset or elimination diet, you would eliminate seed-based spices, which would include paprika. So, you know, the paprika is nice. It does add a teeny bit of flavor, but it's certainly not the biggest flavor component in this dish, and so I don't think you would be missing much by leaving it out. So you could leave that out, and aside from that, it would be completely autoimmune paleo safe, which means it's also Whole30 as it is. I mean, you could say this is ketogenic because it's practically zero carb except for the little bit of onion in there. But then the rest of the meal you put together would determine your carb load. And speaking of carbs, I told you we might serve ours with rice, but I decided to do potatoes because I had some, and I don't want to do rice. I'm still doing a Whole30, working on that reset, and so no grains for me. And yes, potatoes. So white potatoes are a nightshade, so they would be not allowed on autoimmune paleo, but they certainly could be part of a regular healthy diet because a potato is a vegetable. It's a real whole food. I have no problem with potatoes. So I'm just going to smash these. I'm not going to make like mashed potatoes with a whole bunch of butter and cream and whatnot. This is just smashed with a little bit of my clarified butter and salt and pepper, and that's delicious. And it will be a nice vehicle for my meat and all that gravy. Let me just give that a taste. Probably needs a little more seasoning. It's delicious, actually. So I told you I was going to serve mine like soup. Ooh, that was hot going down my throat. Woo-wee. So I'm going to give myself a little bit of potatoes. A spoon would be easier to get them out than a spatula. Okay, so a little dab of potatoes. I want a lot of that broth. Let me give it a taste actually and make sure it's not too salty or not salty enough. It's delicious, it's very good. So, a nice serving of the meat with the onions. Like I said, I'm going for soup here, so I'm not afraid to really load it up with the broth. I want that broth. And then the last part of my meal are these veggies. So if you were able to do this in sandwich form and could load up the sliced meat and onions, and these peppers and mushrooms would be delicious on a big hoagie roll, maybe with some cheese melted on top. That would be delicious. I'm gonna just give myself a few more mushrooms and not many peppers. I have a little bit of trouble with peppers. And there we go, our Italian roast beef. Again, like so many of the recipes I've given you lately, I feel like some of the chicken recipes in the Instant Pot, you can do so many different things with them. You certainly could eat this on a sandwich. You can do like I'm doing and turn it into a soup. You could thicken this up so it's like a gravy, serve over your mashed potatoes. You could serve it over rice. You could just simply have a nice big pile of the meat and veggies, and that would be delicious as well. And that's what I'll do for my husband. So here's mine with the soup. Let me get a spoon for the potatoes. Back when I was a kid, we would have buttered potatoes, and so Mom would just boil the little potatoes and then not mash them up and just put a bunch of butter and salt and pepper and parsley, of course, right? Lots of parsley. That's what this reminds me of. So he loves bell peppers. I turned my skillet up really high. I had some clarified butter in there, so I got a lot of a nice sear on those peppers. Got too many implements going on here. Give him a nice pile of meat. So tender and really, really flavorful. Very delicious. You could use a lot of different cuts with this. Like I said, this was a bottom round. It's what I got from Butcher Box, and it worked perfectly. But any sort of pretty lean roast would do really well in this dish. We'll just give him a little bit of the gravy on his potatoes, a little bit on his meat. And there we go, our Italian roast beef, done a couple different ways for you in the Instant Pot, nice and fast. And I hope you enjoyed this one. Thanks, everybody.